benefits. CERB has ended. The benefits that they've got in place complement to employment insurance are temporary. They're sunsetting. So I think it's worth having a conversation. It's really important to have a conversation about where are the gaps in the systems that we do have. What can we do, for example, to make existing programs more adequate, have better coverage, ensure that people who use them actually have dignity, right? Like these are attributes of a proposed basic income folks like. So I'm all down for that. But I don't know, I've taken a quick look at the resolutions that are being debated at both the Liberal and the NDP conventions this weekend. And I see an awful lot of hopefulness and optimism, but I don't necessarily see a lot of clarity around what's the design and what are the trade-offs, though, because that's important too.
Let me ask you about a basic trade-off that might be necessary, and I don't know whether you get it done without guaranteed basic income. We have talked about how this is a she session because of the hospitality industry and other service industries that have virtually shut down because of COVID, and that many of the people in those industries are women, working women. They're women in many cases who are immigrants. And there are people who need possibly training to get them to something better. They need skill set improvement to get to a better side of the industry that they've been working in. We've also been talking on and on for the last number of years about people in the energy industry, primarily in Western Canada, primarily in Alberta, and shifting them into other things. And we talk about how the other things might have to do with alternate energy, but they might be other things. The point is, they too need training. So here's my question. With all kinds of people right now trying to do 2 and 3 jobs if they can in order to make ends meet, not having any time for training at all, would it make sense to have some sort of guaranteed income so that people can actually train their way into a better life in this country? Or do you, as someone who studies this much more assiduously than I do, Professor Robson, do you see that as a pipe dream?
So I take your point, right? Economists talk about the fact that when you reduce the amount that you're working in order to study more, that's an opportunity cost, right? You're working less, you're bringing in less income. And you're right, you've identified a couple of different sectors in the labor market right now, where we know that skills training, employability services, all those kinds of things are going to be really important for supports and transitions. Now, I think actually you can attack this program, or this problem rather, from a couple of different angles. There may be some folks for whom it makes sense to take a brief pause from working all together and focus full time on their studies and on training. Now, we have systems in place to support learners in post-secondary settings. Those have challenges and problems with them in the sense that they're mostly debt-focused, debt-oriented, even though the evidence is over the longer term, it's a good investment, right? What you take on in debt, you generally make up over the course of your working life. But another way to think about it, though, is to say, can we do more so that workplaces are more flexible, right, to support learners, so that the supply of the learning itself doesn't have to be like all or nothing. Maybe you don't have to stop working altogether and only engage in full-time study, right? Maybe this is something that we figure out a way to allow people to continue working as well as learning. So I think that there's something to the idea of better portable, personalized supports that help people engage in lifelong learning. But we've also got to pay attention to the supply side too, right? So I guess I'm not 100% opposed to providing income support for people. It just that's kind of a more targeted approach than what most people talk about when they think about sort of universal, available to all, maybe on the basis of citizenship, basic income.
So I get the impression you feel it's fiscally much more responsible to talk about support rather than guaranteed annual income. We'll keep the discussion going in just a few moments. A lot of people have been discussing this business of guaranteed basic income or universal basic income for a long time, and tonight we have the opportunity of talking to someone who actually knows what she's talking about, because she sees all the numbers, the revenue numbers, and what she calls the so-called supply side. We'll continue our conversation with Professor Jennifer Robson at Carleton in Ottawa in a moment, and we've got Warren Kinsella, a Carleton graduate, by the way, coming up in about 20 minutes from right now, right here on Charles Adler Tonight.
Going to the Ministry of Labor for severance advice? You need employmentlawyer.ca. The ministry can only help you get your minimum severance pay instead of what you are actually entitled to. Call your Samfiru and get what you're really owed. Employmentlawyer.ca. Hello, I am water.
And I am earth, and we are just made for each other.
I come down as rain and hit on earth.
Together we make mud, sweet, beautiful mud.
Some find us challenging.
While all those Subarus with symmetrical full-time all-wheel drive revel in our creation.
Mud, our special gift to the world. Enjoy Subaru's all-weather drive event with great rates on 2021 Subaru Foresters. Go online to build and price yours and adventure on in all weather.
Thanks for calling 1-800-GOT-JUNK. This is Sarah. How can I help?
I knew it, but I thought it was elves.
Uh-oh.
Do you remember me?
Sure I do. You called last year because you thought our truck team members wear caps to hide their elf ears.
But you don't use elves. You use fairies.
What makes you say that?
I met Charlotte.
I didn't make this up like a satire joke of
First I
advertising.
pointed, then the junk disappeared. But the sparkle sound came a little bit late. So I said, you should probably make that sparkle sound a little bit quicker.
Jesus. Wow. So I should buy a car and get rid of all my junk.
I'll come and share it.
Kurt Hahn broadcast his credo for an earlier prototype of the scheme on BBC Radio.
Boys or girls are gathered in residential courses of 1 month, 10 times a year, to practice active citizenship within a self-governing community.
Wait, what?
To taste vital health as a result of athletic training. To strengthen self-respect through their surprise at what they can do. To experience the brotherhood of adventure, river, plain, forest, sea, hill, or air, and the cleansing that can go with it. In addition, there should always be present some target of proficiency, demanding skill or care.
The idea was to try and broaden the sort of development of people's lives. It's a great mistake to think of this as character training. It may help to develop character, but basically it's to give a broader aspect to the development of the individual. And it, as I say, grew out of existing schemes.
It grew with astonishing speed. In the first year, 7,000 boys signed up. Within a decade, the numbers of boys and girls taking part could be measured in millions. And for everyone, there was a challenge to experience and a story to tell. In 2006, the Queen awarded the scheme a royal charter at a special ceremony at Buckingham Palace in London.
You have the insight, courage, and determination to establish the award scheme 50 years ago.
It is a BBC link, but I think that means most likely it's US dollars.
Over 5 million young people have taken up the challenge.
Said there's been a billion won renminbi deposits to your account.
Enduring admiration. An admiration which words alone can never fully express.
It's a whole bunch of millions of dollars.
The DOD scheme evolved and grew in a shifting climate. The age of deference was in decline. The pageantry, the state visits, the royal weddings, the jubilees, all.
Apply over the phone or online at lamina.ca. Get approved instantly, up to $1,000 with no documents or credit checks, and payback over 3 to 5 months. Relieve some stress at 1-800-NEW-CREDIT or apply online at lamina.ca.
I'm Cara Zor-El.
Supergirl. Suit up with Showcase.
Supergirl? Kind of on
For the final season of Supergirl.
I'm going to be doing my job with heart and integrity and
so maybe
worldwide audience of some 350 million. Many had reservations about its impact on the rarefied nature of the British monarchy, and it hasn't been seen since 1972. At the same time, Prince Philip's reputation as the jovial member of the royal family, who strove where possible to put people at their ease, was coupled with an impatience with those who he felt were ill-informed or ill-prepared.
The Duke of Edinburgh has been accused of making racist comments during a factory visit in Scotland.
That was a headline in 1999. 3 years earlier, he'd been in the news over gun control.
Prince Philip raises a storm by coming out against the ban on handguns.
And these came on top of earlier incidents drawing headlines.
In China in the 80s, he famously described Beijing as ghastly and told British students they would all be slitty-eyed if they stayed there much longer. And 4 years ago, he asked a Scottish driving instructor, how do you keep the natives off the booze long enough to pass the test?
At an address to Britain's General Dental Association, he told the audience, Dontopodology is the science of opening your mouth and putting your foot in it, a science which I have practiced for a good many years.
What did he say?
Some excuse the Duke, citing his overwhelming desire to engage with people and put them at their ease, occasionally getting it horribly wrong, but hating the alternative accusation of aloofness. Others found in his gaffes a fundamental flaw, revealing that his background and royal life left him detached from the real lives of ordinary people. It was the group of young students questioning the Duke on BBC television in 1968 who perhaps got nearest to finding out what made him tick.
Which qualities do you think have been most used to you, and which would you like your children
to contribute? And what they did was model, look, what would it take to be able to pay adults in DC a fixed amount. So whether it's, 5,000 or 10,000, and what they found is that it really doesn't take long before the cost of paying that kind of level of income starts to rival the cost in the province of running the healthcare system, right? So these are expensive when you pick a target level like that. Another way that people have tried to cut this, and again, if folks are interested, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has just put out another effort to try and cost a model of basic income. There are winners and losers, right? For people who are currently living in low income, under the poverty line, they were looking at a target income level of about 17,000 for a single person and about 24,000 for a couple. But it comes with massive, massive changes to the entire way that we run our tax and transfer system. So as much as it would significantly raise incomes of folks at the very bottom, there would also be important declines, right, in after-tax income for people starting kind of in the middle, and also some distributional issues, particularly for folks with disabilities.
So here's the question. When that particular parliamentary watchdog person, the parliamentary budget officer, puts in his report, and he's working with these numbers, approximately 17K for a single person, approximately 24,000 for a couple. He's talking about this would cut the poverty rate in this country in half.
It's the hardest for us to do it for.
What's the impact of that? If you didn't have to worry about debt, what happens to a country that cuts its poverty rate by half?
Well, look, I think that there would be important potential returns in terms of,
according to this Prime Minister, the budgets will balance themselves.
Potential returns in terms of child outcomes, right? We know poverty is it's bad for people's health. It's bad for communities. It's really bad for child development outcomes as well, right? Like kids who grow up in poverty live with those consequences for the rest of their lives. So you get a healthier, better equipped population and future workforce looking ahead. That would happen for sure. But economists also worry about the potential disincentives then for people who are going to get the basic income to also continue working. And that also shows up in the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report too.
Is the money they're making, almost all of it, going directly back into the economy, Professor Robson?
So we had a pilot program like that here in Ontario for...
When people have basic income, doesn't the income they get from the government, doesn't it go right back into the economy. We've only got 40 seconds for that. And we have to...
Okay, so quick answer. 2/3 of the Canadian economy relies on household spending. Households that have less income spend all of it, right? They don't have money stashed away in places. So you're right that $1 in the hands of a lower income family goes right back out into the community. That is true.
Jennifer Robson, I wish say this because I always mean it. I wish we had more time. We'll do this down the road. I don't get the impression from you that at the moment you're optimistic that this is going to be anything more than another idea that is getting a lot of talk because it is very, very expansive. Dr. Robson, thanks for your help tonight. As always, have a terrific weekend.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Jennifer Robson is all about public policy, and she teaches at Carleton, a beautiful school in the nation's capital, where Warren Kinsella also happened to go to school a number of years ago and graduated. He's now a lawyer, and he does some other things like gets on the show every Friday night at this time. In a moment, Warren Kinsella right here on Charles Antler tonight.
Parents and educators are working closer than ever to keep students safe and learning. But there's one partner missing, the provincial government. The pandemic isn't even over, and Doug Ford is cutting $800 million from schools. And he's privatizing, making virtual learning permanent, taking away money needed for smaller classes and supports for students. Ontario has a world-class public school system. Tell the Ford Conservatives to stop using this crisis to pull it apart. A message from the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario.
Maybe we can be civil about this. Just work things out. Then again, maybe we can't. We're family.
Wow.
Self-care, yeah, got a lot of that.
Some type of lawyer. We'll fix your taxes, get you bail, get you off that DUI, get you your kids back. Deal with the CRA.
Nothing on my neck, nothing on my fist, it's all on my check. Don't you get the gist? I got the confidence, don't need a brand on my chest. Hey, I know what my value is. Hey, wealthy people don't need jewelry. Hey, look at 21 Savage and Bill Gates. Hey, the rap industry got a complex. I turned reality into a lucid dream. I turned a lucid dream into whipped cream. Cash rules, nothing around me. I only use it for paper planes, actually. I'm the opposite of Microsoft, I'm big and hard. Let that resonate, maybe a little more. I got that lyricism sprinkled with a lot of flow. I made my sauce authentic on a chopping board. Baby, it's spicy, be careful. Don't check the bottle too much, be gentle. It's kinda high on the Scoville level. Don't burn your tongue, don't get it in your eyes too. I turned reality into a lucid dream. I turned a lucid dream into whipped cream. Cash rules, nothing around me. I only use it for paper planes, actually. Self-care, yeah, got a lot of that. No food tastes good as having a six-pack. You should cut your snacks same way you cut that crack. Then you wouldn't look fat as a Cadillac. Baby, looking like a snack. I can see you dipping squats on the squat rack. I don't need a beat, I don't really need a track. You can be my producer with your booty clap. I turned reality into a lucid dream. I turned a lucid dream into whipped cream. Cash rules, nothing around me. I only use it for paper planes, actually. Baby, keep your pants on, zip tight, locked off. This is not the time for you to rack it up. We be in court, the judge is getting cross. You robbed the bank, baby, you took your mask off. You took $100K and left it at my front door. Thought it was funny. Nice joke, cause you know I bail you out no matter what the cost. I need that flavor, baby, shit, cause I got the sauce.
This is Global News.
Cause I got the sauce.
I'm Pirani. Federal and provincial figures are paying tribute to Prince Philip as flags across Canada were lowered following his death at the age of 99. At a news conference in Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reflected on his own relationship with the Duke of Edinburgh. The bells of the Peace Tower rang 99 times on Parliament Hill Friday, one for every year of his life. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace has confirmed private funeral services to be held at Windsor Castle for the royal family. It is believed that Prince Harry, as he has status as a diplomat, will be able to make it to the funeral despite COVID-19 restrictions. A British Columbia Supreme Court judge has dismissed a second-degree murder charge related to a high-profile 2011 killing because of how police handled a key piece of evidence. As Jordan Armstrong reports in this Global News exclusive, it's a decision that could potentially impact hundreds of other murder cases.
Back in April of 2011, just hours after they were married, Manbir Khajla and his wife were involved in a fender bender in Surrey. When Khajla got out of the vehicle and approached the other car, he was shot by a suspect who then left the scene. In May of 2018, then 30-year-old Samandeep Gill was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Then in March of this year, the judge ruled the RCMP's Integrated Homicide Investigation Team had held on to a key piece of evidence without obtaining the proper warrant and dismissed the charges against Gill. The decision by IHIT not to seek the proper warrant was made despite legal advice telling the team to do so.
Basically, the police threw out the rule book.
Matthew Nathanson is the lawyer for Gill, the former accused, now set free.
Deliberately disregarding the law in what appears to be almost all of their cases across the board for a matter of years.
The glaring question now is how many BC homicide cases are potentially in legal jeopardy because of IHIT's former practice of non-compliance with the law, according to the ruling. In a statement, IHIT says steps have been taken to, quote, ensure our investigative standards and actions align with and are compliant with Section 490. The statement also says the homicide team is working with the BC Prosecution Service on how to move forward. Jordan Armstrong, Global News.
European regulators are investigating the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine for unusual blood clots, similar to the possible risk from AstraZeneca. The J&J vaccine is made with resembling technology, prompting questions about similar side effects. On Friday, the group said it is investigating 4 reports of unusual clots, one in a J&J study, the others during the U.S. rollout of the one-dose vaccine. It reiterates that it's not clear if there's a link to the vaccine, which is set to roll out in Europe in the next few weeks. However, it says it will continue to work closely with regulators to assess the data. Security forces in Myanmar have once again cracked down heavily on anti-coup protesters, even as the military downplayed reports of state violence. At least 4 people were said to be killed in Bago, northeast of Yangon, in an attack that began before dawn. However, the Bago Weekly Journal Online says an unnamed source at the city's main hospital believed that number was around 10. At least 614 protesters and bystanders have been killed since the coup, according to independent tallies.
Real talk, common sense, Canadian. This is Charles Adler Tonight.
Here is Charles Adler.
Evening, Canadians. I'm Charles Adler, son of the great night for Canadian common sense. Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun joins us in about 30 minutes with I have trouble spitting it out of my mouth because I'm just completely blown away with an amazing new poll done by a very credible pollster in Alberta, suggesting if an election were held today, the Kenney government would lose not 10, not 20, but 30 seats. And Angus Reid earlier today came out with a number on Kenney, which was incredible. 75% of Albertans, 75%. Having very little confidence in Kenney himself. He's got the worst number of any premier in the country right now. And of course, to add to all that, he's got a rebellion going on in his own caucus. Rick Bell coming up in about 25 minutes from right now. Warren Kinsella, we do our regular thing in this hour on Friday nights. You were never a big fan of Jason Kenney. You were generally on the other side of him throughout his federal career, of course. But are you not surprised at how quick the descent has been?
Over COVID? You mean his talking
not over COVID, just over the. I mean, he's only been in power for 2 years. You rarely get a leader that engenders this much loathing in its population, and this is a conservative leader of a conservative province, this much loathing after only 2 years?
Well, it isn't necessarily a conservative province anymore. You know, it's not the province I grew up in. When I grew up there, my family, like we were liberals who'd come from Montreal to escape the language wars, something you would be familiar with. And, you know, everybody we knew was a conservative. And you'd have people moving there from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and elsewhere, and they'd all become conservatives. It became this rite of passage, except for us, I guess. And it was just, you know, conservatives got elected at every level of government, federally and provincially, except municipally. And it was always interesting to me as a observer of politics in Alberta. Like Calgary was supposed to be the epicenter of Canadian conservative thought, and but we kept electing liberal mayors in the city of Calgary.
Well, thank you, CRI.
To falling demand after the Spring Festival. Food prices dropped 3.6% in March, with vegetable prices down 14%, while pork prices dropped 11% as well. However, the prices of oil and gasoline increased. China's factory gate prices rose in March at their fastest annual pace in nearly 3 years. They were up 4.4% as growth in the world's second largest economy continued to gain momentum. After months of deflation, producer prices have started to pick up sharply this year as the cost of oil, copper, and agricultural goods rally.
One reason is the input effect of international commodity prices. Another reason is the low base due to the COVID-19 pandemic last year that led to a big year-on-year rise in March. The third reason is that many new projects restarted in spring, and many projects have been accelerated. These factors contributed to the rise of PPI.
For discussion, Wang Yaojing, Assistant Professor in Economics, Peking University, joins us now. Thank you for joining us. Will the global demand recovery after the pandemic push consumer prices up?
Thank you for having me. So I think for China, we're definitely ahead on our recovery progress where everyone is back to work and back to school. So we see our CPI being quite stable in here. However, for other parts of the world, demand recovery is still on the way. So the demand for consumer products would highly depend on workers' ability and willingness to buy goods and services. Although countries around the world have taken different measures to help the unemployed workers, the speed of recovery will still have to rely on how quickly and widely the vaccines will be distributed so that workers can get back to their jobs.
Commodity prices are pushing up consumer prices. We're seeing copper, we're seeing oil, and corn prices going up. So will these global commodity prices keep rising?
Well, that is certainly one possibility, especially in the short run, and there are two aspects to it. One is monetary and the other is the supply side. So with the quantitative easing policies, global commodity prices have been rising since the beginning of the year. But on the supply side, some of the commodity origins are developing countries that are expected to suffer more and possibly longer from the pandemic. So for example, the price of copper rose sharply after Chile's announcement of closing up borders. So even though we would expect the price to stabilize in the long run, the expectation of inflation and slow recovery of most developing countries could still keep driving up the commodity prices in the short run.
You mentioned monetary policy. The U.S. is printing a lot of dollars in trillions. What's the risk of imported inflation for China?
Yes, so the commodity prices could raise manufactured costs and eventually pass on to consumer products, so that we see the March's number for the PPI is up by more than 4%, which represents a risk factor to China. But as the leading country in recovery from the pandemic, we still have a lot of room in our monetary policy, exchange rate, and even foreign policy to maintain the domestic price level. So, for example, the signing of the oil deal with Iran is one of them to ensure oil price not affected by imported inflation. And the State Council of Finance Committee has just met yesterday, I think, that reconfirmed the market's confidence of the stable macroeconomic environment.
Ms. Wong, some say much of the newly printed money will go to property and stock market for investment, and we're not going to real economy, so we don't need to worry about inflation. What's your take on that?
We do see for the United States, at the least, that a lot of the extra liquidity flows to the various assets and the financial market, whereas the inflation rate still remains very low. But this kind of standard rate, however, is passed on to some developing countries, especially some of them have to increase interest rate to ease the pressure of hyperinflation, like Turkey, Brazil, and Russia. But luckily for us, we have a strong system to ward off most of such risk.
Yeah, I think that's what IMF chief is calling a dangerous divergence in the global recovery. We'll definitely cover that later on in our show. Thank you very much for your insight into this. That's Ms. Wang Yaojing from the Peking University. Thank you so much. Well, along with inflation, global food prices are also on the rise and have been rising for 10 straight months, actually. The Food and Agricultural Organization's food price index averaged 118 points in March, higher than February's data, and is at its highest level since June 2014. The index measures monthly changes for a basket of cereal, oilseeds, dairy, meat, and sugar. Vegetable oils were the main driving force, while cereal dropped. The UN Food Agency expects world cereal production in 2021 to increase for the third consecutive year and has raised its preliminary global wheat production forecast on better than expected anticipated crop conditions in several countries. Global wheat production is forecast to reach a new high this year, driven by a likely sharp rebound across Europe and expectations of a record harvest in India. In addition to rising food prices, Brexit also threatens food security in some districts. My colleague in London, Jenny, spoke with Peter Alexander, a senior lecturer of global food security at the University of Edinburgh, and started by asking him about the impact of Brexit on Britain's food security.
I don't think there are any food shortages. As far as consumers perceive Brexit within the mainland of the UK, Scotland, England, and Wales, there hasn't really been a great disruption from Brexit. Northern Ireland's been slightly worse affected as far as the consumers being concerned, at least in the beginning, and the regulations haven't been fully enforced, and indeed they've been loosened to try and accommodate those trade flows that are needed between both the rest of the UK and of course the EU.
COVID and Brexit worried customers, it worried the big supermarkets. There was this concern about whether or not Britain would have enough food to put on the shelves of the shops. Maybe it is time for the UK and other countries to become much more self-sufficient and stop flying food around the world on these rather fragile food chains.
Yes, I mean, you're right. There's two parts to your question. I suppose there was a lot of concern about how the pandemic would play out with Brexit, and indeed, there was the hiatus in transport to France just before the turn of the year, and that did cause a few days of logistics not being able to flow as normal. But the second half of your question was about whether a shift to more local food, more greater self-sufficiency within the UK would be more sustainable and desirable. And I think it's actually a lot more complicated than that. If we're thinking that local food is often mentioned as something that can achieve lots of beneficial outcomes, greater sustainability, higher resilience, and so forth. But actually, I think it's something that needs to be thought of in a lot more detail. Globalization within the food system has created lots of opportunity for a more efficient system. And if we roll that back and have a much more local system, then it could be less efficient, it could have higher environmental costs and actually not be as resilient.
The Central Bank, the People's Bank of China, has led 3 units to issue a document to facilitate the opening up of Hainan Island. The document says Hainan is China's biggest special economic zone and has the advantage of deeper reform and experiment with the highest level of opening up policies. The document put forward 33 measures to support Hainan's opening up. They include raising the limit for foreign exchanges and facilitating transborder trade and investment, further opening up Hainan's financial sector and improve the island's financial system, encourage overseas investors to buy capital management products issued within the Hainan Free Trade Part, and allowing foreign investors working in Hainan to invest in securities, allow them to buy properties on the island. The measures also include encouraging foreign financial institutions to open branches in Hainan and encourage domestic banks in the island to take in overseas investors. Nanfa off-season crop breeding base, due to its tropical location, has been designated as a seed-producing base for various crops in China. Chief among them, its new varieties of rice and cotton have been feeding and closing China's huge population over the past few decades. Our reporter Li Jianhua has more.
Based on China's southern tip, this crop breeding base, a benchmark of China's crop seed storage, is responsible for producing seeds for multiple Chinese provinces. This year, 12,000 hectares of land have been used to produce seeds, slightly less than that in previous years. This is mainly because China paid more attention to agricultural production in 2020, especially crop seed production. Therefore, we can tell that seed storage in the rest of China is sufficient. Hua Zetian, a retired professor, has been in the business for nearly 40 years. He said fruit supplies were always a problem in his childhood, and now is striving to boost Chinese yields.
我们原先是主要解决吃饱饭的问题。对，现在我们已经实现小康了。那么小康高质量的小康，我们要把我们的传统这个常规技术，要和这个生物技术。
We used to focus on whether we produce enough food. Now China has become a well-off society. At this stage, we need to incorporate new technologies into traditional farming. Using biotechnology, we can tell the features of a new crop through molecular analysis by taking a leaf sample, including its disease resistance and alkali tolerance.
麦秆含呢这些形状，那么我们就通过分子的水平就能够把它检测出来。
Over the past few decades, the base has also achieved breakthroughs in cotton production. The cotton seeds produced here, whose plants are suitable for mass harvesting, are planted in northwest China's Xinjiang, the country's largest cotton producer.
就是品质的话，我们现在的品质的话，完全可以跟美国、澳大利亚，就是可以跟它一个起跑线上。
Our new cotton variety is not as good as that of US and Australia. The cotton in the staple length reaches 30 millimeters. Its fiber strength is over 30, and its micronear is around 4.5. So we no longer have to rely on the US and Australia for cotton.
可以自发的说，我们现在可以不依赖美国和澳大利亚，我们的棉花。
About 70% of the new Chinese crop varieties have been cultivated here since the 1950s, thanks to the province's tropical climate and rich biological resources. And this is the testbed for Chinese agricultural scientists to produce new crop breeds aimed at boosting yields and quality to feed a population of about 1.4 billion people. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Sanyang, Hainan Province.
Today marks the second day of a special program, Tides of Changes, tracking China's blue economy. Omar Khan is in South China's Hainan Province, where some have spared no effort in marine ecosystem preservation. Omar, it's great to see you in Sanya, enjoying the sunshine and beaches there. I've been there myself many times, and I know millions of tourists visit Sanya every year.
They're going to tell us all these good things, and I'm not saying they're not true or they're bad.
Diving, fishing,
cruising,
so tell us what's being done in marine preservation there.
Well, Jinpeng, you're spot on with that statement right there. When you think of Hainan, when you think of places like Sanya, you're going to think of boating, you're going to think of water activities, a holiday destination, a place for people to get away. But since we've been here for about a week, it's been absolutely eye-opening experience, not only for me, but the entire CGTN crew. We've spent...
Normally I'm interested in this shit, but it's driving me.
You know, roaming the ball really well.
I gotta go watch my own video.
And, you know, they're pretty great people, Dave Johnson and so on. And you know, I think that Trudeau made a mistake. He didn't listen to the expert panel. I don't think he's going to make that mistake again. So that's why probably they're not rushing to appoint somebody like Mensch to make sure they get it right this time.
Ordering China around.
I mean, we have no governor general right now. Can Trudeau actually appoint someone new before the biggest drop? Are there any restraints on him at all?
No, absolutely. He could appoint somebody tonight. He could, listening to you and I talk and say, Charles and Lauren want somebody, and he could do that. Unlikely, but he could do that. So yeah,
if you appointed someone like Menchie just to figure this out, let's say he wants an election. I'm just guessing here. Let's say he wants an election in June, and he needs to visit the Governor General at Rigaud Hall to make all of this happen, nice and comfy the way it's supposed to be. Dot all the I's, cross all the T's. Could he actually get someone like Menchie installed there, even though Menchie's still the mayor? I guess Menchie would have to resign and then. Immediately, someone else to run Calgary for a little while? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, he would have to resign immediately. But he's got an alternative right now in the form of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. That is the person in these circumstances who fills in for the Governor General. So at the funeral of Prince Philip, as you pointed out, and the occasion of an election.
So the next Governor General won't get screened by
who's pretty learned and pretty smart to fill that role. And you know, I wouldn't be worried even if we had some kind of constitutional crisis, as we've had in the past with minority governments, because it would be the Chief Justice who would be examining that with the experts who are at Rideau Hall. And there's some constitutional experts there who analyze those questions. So I think we'll be okay. It would be kind of cool if we were to have
all this is going to go down while the
former mayor of Calgary, this Muslim man who just won in exceptional circumstances and has done a pretty good job. It would be great to have somebody like him.
But at the moment, for whatever formalities are necessary, signing off on bills and that, it's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And there's no doubt, Warren, that if I open up the lines right now and ask people, you know, what's the name, who is the Chief Justice, the lines would absolutely be flooded coast to coast to coast. Because everybody, not just everybody in the country knows who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada is.
Yeah, do you want me to tease it out for them, or
it's just, you know, in fact, some of these things fascinate me. You could have one of the most important jobs in Canada. I think most people would agree that being a chief judge is pretty important stuff. But I'll bet you 90% of people have no idea who that is.
No, whereas, you know, in the United States today, President Biden announced this commission, this bipartisan commission to examine, you know, expanding the U.S. Supreme Court. And it is big, big news. And everybody's talking about it. And, you know, Republicans are fulminating about it. The Democrats are saying it's necessary. But up here, we do things a little bit differently. And I think we're better served as a result.
So you may be hearing the typing in the background. And you're probably wondering, what's Adler doing? Well, Adler is Googling so that I can tell you that the current Chief Justice of Canada is Richard Wagner.
Well, that's what I said. I said Chief Justice Wagner, my friend.
I didn't want to get through the half hour with people thinking that we didn't know, so I thought, why don't we just honestly tell them we're no different than anybody else, and we have to Google the name of our own.
No, I knew that. I knew.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry.
I knew it.
I didn't know you knew. I assumed I gave you a couple of chances to mention his name, and you didn't, and that's why I went to Google.
No, I did. I rewind the tape there, Maestro. I said Justice Wagner. Okay. I didn't say Richard, but I said Justice Wagner.
I must have missed it. You get two.
I must have put you to sleep as usual at that moment. But I did say but it's interesting.
Constitutional
he does not have the kind of profile that Beverly McLaughlin did. And she kind of cultivated that profile. She did lots of speeches and stuff like that. He's a very different Chief Justice, and that's okay.
Yeah, he probably needs a public relations firm like Daisy Group to kind of jack up.
I agree. What an excellent suggestion. Adler is a link. Thank you.
On that suggestion, Warren. Thank you so much for this, and we'll talk to you again next Friday.
Thanks, my friend. Take care.
Appreciate it very much. Warren Kinsella joins us in the second hour of the show every single Friday night. He's a staple. He's an institution here at the program. In just a few moments, I want to talk to Rick Bell, who's been writing up a storm this week for the Calgary Sun because of everything that's transpired politically in Alberta. It's a virtual.
License 10349.
People don't usually sing about their mortgage, but at Northwood Mortgage they do. They sing about lower rates. They sing about greater cash flow. They sing because we help them.
Recyclable cashmere this year. 60% of the collection is made from used cashmere. We try to generate zero pollution in the production chain. The costs are higher because extra fees are added when recycling the raw materials, but it's worthwhile for the brand value.
In China, many fashion brands have noticed the importance of using sustainable fabric. At the Fashion Week's Mo Fair, dozens of fashion brands showcased their green achievements. And green demand has also generated a business increase for green suppliers. This t-shirt looks no different from any other, but it's made from polyester generated from 8 plastic bottles.
I don't
this
want that
technology is
at all.
provided by a domestic company dedicated to green solutions in the fashion industry. And their sales have jumped by triple digits in the last few years.
Well-known local fashion brands are all focusing on sustainability. It's a trend that will never go back. It's just like electric cars replacing fossil fuel cars.
I don't want to wear polyester either.
As Gao said,
Polyethylene into
sustainability is not a new thing in the
that's what I
fashion
wasn't 100% sure
nor at the
of the
Shanghai
chemistry.
Fashion Week.
Thank you.
This marks the third season since the Fashion Week Committee launched a special sustainable section, and the topic of going green is more important this year.
Makes him the ideal choice. Brian Ludmer. Visit ludmerlaw.com. That's ludmerlaw.com. Subway Restaurants introduces new potato bun sidekicks.
I've got 8.5 minutes commercials. Wow. It is moving, eh?
The fashion industry will reach 102 million tons by the end of 2030, making the fashion industry one of the largest producers of pollution at that time. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
Official data show that while the total retail sales of China's apparel industry continue to decline, the proportion of online sales have increased. In fact, online sales now account for 25% of all retail sales for the first 11 months of 2020, thanks to a network of e-commerce platforms and live streams and brands. Technology such as smartphones, 5G, and internet tech also played a part. By the end of last year, the number of shoppers purchasing made through the mobile phones was over 700 million, accounting for about 80% of mobile internet users. Shop video users reached more than 8 million, and e-commerce live streaming users touched 300 million. The data also showed 18 to 24-year-olds accounting for 20% of apparel consumption. More discussion on China's fashion industry. Han Yanghu, she's a strategy consultant and founder of Nightfly, joins us live. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Hu. Has China's fashion brands improved their competitiveness in the country and around the world, and how?
In the classroom. Attacked on the bus. Pushed down on the sidewalk. We are your neighbors. Fathers and sons. Mothers, daughters. Girl Scouts. And Little Leaguers. We are the so-called quiet, docile ones.
We live in fear, but hide behind soft smiles.
We are being targeted, attacked, killed. We are the Asian community. And we are hurting.
Stand with us.
Follow #StopAsianHate today.
This is Global News. I'm Safia Pirani. It's still not clear if Mark Carney intends to run for the Liberals in the next federal election, but the former Bank of Canada governor is pledging his support for the party. Up till now, party has avoided any overt show of partisanship, but he's telling Liberals at their convention that he's committed to public service and helping the governing party. Liberals have long touted Carney as a possible leader one day. Over to another federal convention, NDP delegates could potentially bring back the word socialism into the party constitution. Members voted to scrub it from the preamble in 2013 under then leader Thomas Mulcair. Inequality is fast shaping up to be a key focus of the policy convention. The short list of proposed resolutions include a $15 federal minimum wage and calls to abolish billionaires and for-profit long-term care. Relatives of victims of the Nova Scotia mass shooting will gather in a church in Truro on April 18th to remember their lost relatives 1 year after the tragedy. The closed event, which was organized by volunteers with a non-profit society, is scheduled to be live streamed. On April 18th, 2020, a gunman killed 22 people, including a pregnant woman, in a shooting and burning rampage that started at night and continued for 13 hours. The suspect was then killed by an RCMP officer. The Nova Scotia Remembers Legacy Society is also working to create a permanent memorial. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has paid tribute to Prince Philip for his active work for the betterment of humankind. That message is being passed along by his spokesman, Stefan Dujarric, who says the UN chief has cited his support for the work of his wife, Queen Elizabeth II, for over 60 years as a patron of some 800 charitable organizations.
It's a fun time, and let's go to another place, which is probably also a fun place. Well, here is a story about a place on the Earth which look like exactly like the mountains and deserts on Mars. Ethereal images from the Mars rover Perseverance have lit up the internet ever since NASA's latest high-tech robot landed on the red planet recently. The photos released on NASA's website depict a desiccated landscape of lifeless orange-brown soil with rocky hills snaking across the horizon.
They're like dried beef jerky and
otherworldly, there is also something strikingly familiar about them. Perhaps that's because the images look a lot like a place back here on Earth, a remote desert in Chile that NASA itself has dedicated time and money to exploring. So, according to Brian Glass, the principal investigator of the Atacama rover astrobiology drilling.
And there was another poll that had him at a 39% approval. This poll has him at 32%. So, you know, the trend line is going down. And because, quite frankly, what kind of results would you expect if you have a revolt in your own caucus, among your own members of the legislature? If you have more than a quarter of your MLAs publicly signing their own Declaration of Independence, saying that they oppose the Premier's approach to COVID restrictions and put their names on them. And, you know, so when you have that sort of thing going on, when you have a situation, Charles, where several MLAs have told me that the Premier at a caucus meeting said, if you don't have confidence in this government, I can go to the Lieutenant Governor and I can call an election. The implication being call an election, which, you know, the NDP could win. So, I mean, when you're in a, you know, they could dismiss this poll or any poll. We just had an Angus Reid poll today, which had Jason Kenney, his handling of COVID, his rating is poorest now among premiers. And you'll probably ask me a little bit more about why this great split in Alberta, but there is a huge split. And
I'm looking at that Angus Reid poll. I discussed it earlier with our friend Warren Kinsella. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. It's 75% disapproval for Jason Kenney by the residents of Alberta.
Well, I mean,
I have never seen anything. I've never seen anything below the 60s for someone who's only been in power for 2 years.
Well, you know, on the COVID situation, you have a premier who said for a very long time, you know, I believe in the Charter of Rights. I believe in the minimal impairment of rights. I'm not like other provinces. I'm not like the lockdown nannies. I'm not, you know, I'm for lives and livelihood, you know, lives and livelihoods, etc. And that was among his base. There were a lot of Albertans who did not agree with that. They wanted stricter restrictions. But among the people who voted UCP in the last election, and probably among the likely pool of United Conservative voters this time, you know, it did resonate with, you know, many of them. But then he's been all over the map from that kind of rhetoric to turning on a dime and talking about the thought of body bag, his words, not mine, body bags being hauled out of field hospitals and a healthcare system totally overwhelmed. And, you know, so, you know, he's in one lane, he's in another lane, he's in the middle of the road, and he gets run over. So he's not pleasing the people that want, let's say, lockdowns like in Ontario or Quebec. But he's definitely also not pleasing the people, many of whom are in his base, many of whom are on his team, many of whom sit on the Team Kenney benches in the legislature, who do not want even the restrictions that started today. And for your listeners, who I know are from all over the place, you know, our restrictions basically are, you know, you can drink and eat in an outdoor patio, but not inside. And, you know, there's some restrictions on gyms, but it is not like the Ontario and Quebec situation. So, and that poll also says very, very slightly, there's actually more people who think Kenney's gone too far than that he's not gone far enough. So
malls, I always ask the mall question, you know, because when I hear about lockdowns, I always ask, so what about the malls? Are the malls in Alberta open tonight?
Yes, they're open at.
Are the big box stores in Alberta open tonight?
The Chinook Center, the big shopping center, is open. Yeah. The retail stores, you know, the Bay and Roots and Chapters, they're open, but they're open at, you know, limited capacity.
Sure,
you know,
but they're open. They're open.
Right. Yeah, it's a percentage of the fire code. But I, for instance, went to a store today, and, you know, there was no lineup because, you know, especially if it's a big store, even if it's 15% of the fire code, you know, Charles, there'd still be 100 people in the store. But yeah, so he's. I mean, there are all sorts of other discontents that happened before COVID, and we've talked about some of those before, and they will surface again. But I honestly believe that the Kenney people, and I've heard that the Kenney people really believe, if we only get through COVID, if we only get through the worst of COVID, then, and, you know, the economy starts coming back somewhat, and maybe the oil price goes up a little higher, and maybe those downtown offices that are now empty in Calgary will start getting a little bit more filled, then, you know, all will be, if not forgotten, it will be forgiven. So there are many I guess what I'm saying is there are many rationalizations, Charles, for either the poll we're talking about numbers, or previous polls where the numbers were disturbing, or the Angus Reid poll about his COVID management. I mean, all of these polls, you know, they have slightly different numbers, slightly different questions, slightly different sampling methods, but they're all basically saying that there has been a steady decline for many months, and it has not bottomed out yet. And on top of that, you have a group of MLAs, United Conservative MLAs, and Charles, you've covered politics forever. This is a majority government. This is a government that won a 22% landslide. They were ahead of the NDP by 22% on election night, like you said, 2 years ago. And now you've got over a quarter of them putting their name, rank, and serial number on there, and just so you know, they include the Speaker of the Legislature and the Deputy Speaker of the Legislature, and get this, the person who was the #2 in command for the COVID Committee of Cabinet in the Alberta government.
All right.
They're all on the list. They're all on the list of people. And if I could say this one last thing.
Sure.
Also, what's happening at the same time, which cannot be written off, this cannot be written off, oh, it's a poll or that poll or this poll, they're all polls. It's you've heard, how many times have you heard the only poll that counts is the poll on election day and all the rest is only a snapshot in time? There is also a move, at the same time that all this is happening and Kenny is sort of empty threatening an election, there are also people out there in the out there on the hustings in Alberta, UCP members, UCP constituency associations, some of whom are calling for a leadership review probably sometime later this year. They have not achieved it because Kenny doesn't want a leadership review this year, obviously, and nor do, the people running the party. But there's also people lobbying out there in the world of Martha and Henry. There are people lobbying within his own party to have a vote on his leadership. So you've got the caucus, disturbance, a big disturbance, caucus revolt, caucus rebellion. You've also got a party membership, some of whom are pushing for a vote on his leadership by the party. And then you've got the whole COVID mess, which where there's a deeply divided province and many, many people on his side of the political spectrum do not want even the restrictions that were put in place today, let alone anything stricter than that, something closer to what's going on east of us. So when you put all that in the mix, without even talking about the other issues that people are upset about, Keystone Pipeline not going through, the feeling that Kenny doesn't, advocate strongly enough with Ottawa. I mean, he was elected, we talked about this, Charles, he was elected because of his perceived competence, 19 years in Ottawa, senior cabinet minister, and because he would fight for Alberta. That's really the reason that he got elected, way before COVID. And now I'm portraying to you and to your listeners a gong show.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying I'm portraying now a gong show. This is not...
Yeah, no, it's a gong show, but the line, and we'll go to a break in a second. I just want, before we go to the break, to let people know, the poll done by the very credible Janet Brown. This is not Janet Brown of Vancouver, our Janet Brown, as we like to call her here in Vancouver. This is Janet Brown in Calgary, the pollster. The poll shows that you'd get the reverse image in an election if it was held today that you had a couple of years ago. Rick just mentioned a few moments ago that the UCP, the United Conservative Party of Jason Kenney, beat the NDP by 22 points. According to Janet Brown's new poll as of today, the NDP would be beating the UCP by 23 points, and it would mean a 30-seat loss for Kenney's party, an overwhelming majority for the NDP, mainly because the NDP is absolutely wiping out the Conservatives in Edmonton and beating them by double digits in Calgary. You can't form a Conservative government in Alberta without winning Calgary. And Kenny is losing Calgary. Kenny's party is losing Calgary.
Yeah, I think Charles, they're ahead. It's a 12-point lead for the NDP right now, province-wide. 12 points. 43-31.
Right, but
you're right. The seat count is 55. The seat count is 55-32, and right now they have 62 seats, not 32.
Yeah, so it's just an amazing reversal. And once again, the NDP ahead of the Conservatives by 29 points in Edmonton and 13 points in Calgary. And I guess the part of Alberta, which is always going to be because the Conservatives, regardless is rural Alberta, Kenney's still winning by a little bit, but it's not the way it was just a couple of years ago. We'll continue our conversation with Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun in a moment, right here, Charles Adler, tonight.
Hello, I am water.
And I am earth, and we are just made for each other.
I come down as rain and hit on earth.
Together we make mud, sweet, beautiful mud.
Some find us challenging.
While all those Subarus with symmetrical full-time all-wheel drive revel in our creation.
Mud, our special gift to the world. Enjoy Subaru's all-weather drive event with great rates on 2021 Subaru Foresters. Go online to build and price yours and adventure on in all weather.
When your bank account does more, your money does more, so you can live more too. Switch to the Scotiabank Ultimate Package and get a savings rate of up to 1.8%, unlimited Interac e-transfer transactions, an annual credit card fee waiver on select credit cards, and a $300 welcome bonus. It's the bank account that lets you do more, all from one package. Conditions apply. Rate is for a limited time and varies by savings period. Visit scotiabank.com/ultimate300. Scotiabank.
With the Daily Grand Lotto, you could win $1,000 a day for life.
Wait, every single day?
Yeah.
So I'd start liking Mondays?
Probably.
But everybody hates Mondays, so I'd suddenly be an outcast, living on the fringes of society, a bizarre Monday-loving weirdo.
But you get $1,000 every day for life.
Then TGIM, baby, and every other day too.
The Daily Grand Lotto draws every Monday and Thursday. Buy tickets and stuff.
Sounds like she's been talking to selling crack. You make you get $1,000 a day. They mentioned very briefly. Because if you don't talk about it at all, that gets suspicious. They mentioned very briefly the Iran. What was the deal? Was it oil? Yeah. Between China and Iran. They don't give a fuck about U.S. sanctions. That's what you did. You drove them to each other. That's perfect. That's perfect. Wagwan music machine maker, and why doesn't it not work no more for me anytime? Fucking hell, it's one non-stop on my tongue. Which does not show. Periodic problems, cyclically. Damn it, I kicked it. Fucking just one bullshit interference thing after another. Oh, this is useful. Thank you. Oh yes, I know. I don't mind. I'm not gonna bother mentioning it every time because I've said more than enough about it. Yeah, up and down, up and down. It's the same stupid exploit every fuck. Was it happening the whole time I was over here? No. As soon as I tried interacting with the controls here, it started. It's fucking ridiculous because all I'm trying to do is fill the 10 minutes. Well, they won't.
ELK.
See, I can't. This is how creative these people are and how they spend their days and hours and nights, I guess. I think we're tricking them into learning or something. Oh, that's good. What was that? Where'd that come from? So CRI voice
Not a landslide in the election result today. Of course, the next election is still 2 years away. Rick Bell, you and I have many things in common, aside from our love of Winnipeg, because you were born and brought up there, and I spent many years there. There are many other things that we have in common. One of them is that for the longest time, both of us were incredibly optimistic about the future of Jason Kenney, whether it was in national or provincial politics. I've admitted to being wrong. I can't remember how often I've said in the last couple of years, I can't believe I was this wrong. But let me just ask you this question, because it's something that you have had a lot of time to reflect on in the last couple of years. Why were we so wrong about Mr. Kenney?
I am still at the state. I did a column a few weeks ago. I've done a couple of these where I basically say very bluntly to the Premier that he has to get his act together. I am going to use the word I used at the beginning of the new year, at New Year, when there was a big scandal about
socialism,
members of the staff and members of his government who went on holidays as a Alberta-style lockdown was being imposed over the Christmas
so creative,
season.
You're so creative.
And when I got my chance to ask him a question on the dial-in,
you're messaging at all times.
I didn't have this scripted. I said, Premier, I am gobsmacked. And I'll be honest.
I'm not going to try to interact with those listeners. I'm literally waiting for you.
I am still gobsmacked.
Shit.
I still.
Up and down. The instant I go to use it, every time,
I really just don't know what happened. He ran a very determined to get the parties together. There were two conservative parties, as some of your listeners may not know. There was a progressive conservatives and the
What's your dumbass fucking doing with child porn fucking type software on your shit? Harassing me.
Rachel Notley, she became the Premier, and Jason Kenney came back to Alberta. And I think it's, you know, I was caught up a lot in the hope
showing me my Facebook.
Of seeing this sort of dynamic that he was coming here to Alberta and through, you know, really force of will and tremendous organization, he was able to win the leadership of one of the two parties and then have a unity vote which united the two parties, and then he runs for the leadership of the new United Party and he wins that. And then he wins the by-election with 70+% of the vote. And then he runs the campaign and wins handily.
You're so creative,
you know, he could speak well.
Yes.
You know that, Charles, as well, no better than me. He can debate well. He can analyze things and break things down. He was traveling in this blue pickup truck and talking about how empathetic he was
5 minutes,
toward Alberta and Albertan concerns. And it all seemed to be just so, you know, almost Hollywood. And it hasn't turned out that way. And it started not being that way before COVID, but COVID has just intensified it, because as you know, there are other premiers who have survived COVID, and some have even thrived in